Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here for our fourth annual Love and Adolescence series. The Center for the Developing Adolescent welcomes you and appreciates your time and your interest in supporting young people, in particular around this topic of love. I started this series 4 years ago to discuss something that is so deeply felt during adolescence, and that is love and the many, many forms that it takes, from an all-consuming crush to the love and admiration of a parent or a caregiver or a mentor, to the intense love that we feel for our best friends and the loyalty that we give and show to our friendships and close confidants. I think maybe most of you think about the intensity of romantic relationships during the teenage years when I say love and adolescence, but I hope that we can pivot a little bit today to talk about the friendships that are formed during this time. I know for me that the friendships I formed during adolescence were so formative, and I'm very much in touch with people who were a part of my life during that time. And it's special to have lifelong friendships, to make new friendships. And so today we'll be talking about that with our experts. We'll talk about how friendships have an important role to play throughout our lives, and in particular during the adolescent years when we're figuring out who we are and sharing our very personal stories with other people. Um, and so we focus today on platonic love. We've talked in the past about breakups and the impact that may have during adolescence or forming new relationships, sexual health. But today we turn to the important topic of the love we feel for our friends and how friends can impact us, support us, sometimes hurt us during the time of adolescence. So joining me for this exciting discussion is Phyllis Fagell, who is a clinical professional counselor. She's a certified professional counselor and author of Middle School Matters and Middle School Superpowers, which are terrific. I encourage you to read them if you haven't already. They focus on peer relationships during early adolescence. We also have today Dr. Mitch Prinstein. He is the chief science of psychology at the American Psychological Association. He's also a professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Mitch was such an inspiration to me when I started to think about the important role that social relationships have. So I'm thrilled to be in conversation with him. We also have on the screen Stephany Cartney. She is a political science undergraduate at UCLA, and is a member of the Center's Youth Scientific Council on Adolescence. So welcome, and thank you all of you for being here. Before we begin the discussion, I'd like to provide some details about the format. We'll leave 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for some Q&A, and we encourage you all to add your questions throughout the session, as we can get to them at the end. We'll be recording the discussion. We'll have it available on the UCLA Center for the Developing Adolescents website and YouTube after this discussion. So please share broadly and encourage your peers to take a listen. Okay, so let's start the discussion about friendships during early adolescence. So research tells us that friends made during late adolescence are more likely to endure throughout our lives. These are the people we turn to in times of sorrow, in times of celebration. And we know how important these friendships are. But friends made during earlier adolescence, roughly between the ages of 10 and 13, can come and go quite frequently. You know, we are in transition in our schooling and our activities, and so that may lend itself to that type of transitional friendships. Phyllis, I know you've written about some of the volatility in friendships during our middle school years. Can you talk a little bit about what this looks like and why this is a very normal part of our development during these years?
Sure. And I love that you call it platonic love because these friendships are so intense
Yeah.
and matter so deeply to kids. But you're right, they're fragile, they're often not reciprocal. And what I tell my students is that every single one of them is going to get dumped or fired by a friend during those years you're talking about. And it's really painful. I've had a parent tell me they wanted to, stab the kid that hurt their child in the eye with a pen. So it's really hard to watch, but it's important. And the statistics that I share with kids from the research are the following. If you ask kids in middle school to name their best friend, only half of the people that they name actually name them back.
Wow. Mhm.
If you follow kids from the beginning of the first year of middle school to the end, only about a third of those friendships are still stable and constant. There's another study that shows that most of these friendships don't last more than a year. If you follow kids from 7th grade to 12th grade, only 1% of those friendships are still intact. And so it sounds really dreadful to adults when they hear those statistics, but it's so reassuring to kids because what I'm really trying to prove to them through these numbers is that there's nothing inherently wrong with them. It's just
Yeah.
that this is the time when they're learning how to be a friend, how to choose a friend. And in order to have that kind of development, to learn social skills, to learn conflict resolution skills, everything that you can think of that relates to these very intense relationships
Mhm.
is happening during these years.
Exactly. And during adolescence, we try on so many different hats in every other domain. So it makes sense that also for friendships, right? We're trying to determine what makes us feel good in a friendship or in a relationship. And that can change, of course, with our interests and changing needs.
And kids are going through puberty at different rates. Their
Mhm.
maturity levels vary greatly. So two kids can be close friends in 5th grade, and then suddenly one is, ranking crushes and putting on makeup, and the other one is still playing with their dolls, and there's this breach, and that's incredibly hurtful.
Yeah.
But often they cycle back and they're friends again
Yeah.
later.
Yeah, exactly. Because the timeline isn't the same for everyone as it may be later in life. Stephany, does this explanation match your middle school experience?
Yes, actually, this actually gave a lot of sight into what I went through.
Mhm.
And hearing you say that a lot of people do go through these intense relationships, it just immediately was like, oh, I wasn't the only one. So I also experienced very intense relationships during this period of time. And as a result, it made me realize how to manage conflict a little bit better. And as you mentioned at the very end, we ended up cycling back to our friendship even after. So yeah, this exactly matches my friendship dynamics growing up.
And how did you notice, Stephany, that your friendship changed as you got older? I mean, now you're in college, and of course, the dynamics are even different still than they were in earlier adolescence.
Yes. So as I would characterize my friendships in my earlier formative years as just they were more fickle. There were friendships that were based on, oh, we have the same class together, let's hang out.
Mhm.
Or we both like the same show, let's do this together. And so those friendships were not really based off of a lot of values. And so as I grew up and I've graduated from high school, started making new friends, it's become more value based and more of, oh, do I see this person as a representation of who I am or who I'm
Mhm.
becoming? And
Mhm.
so I would say like my friendships now have been more healthy
Mhm.
because we value communication more and where our values really do align. So
Mhm.
that's, I will say, like middle school and those earlier years, those friendships were a little bit more volatile than
Yeah.
now, where we do have like these equipped communication skills that we've built. So
That's right, because you've built up communication skills, but also you have maybe a more established set of values for yourself, which are still being kind of worked out during the adolescent years.
yes, I
But we
completely.
know that even these friendships that are maybe not as stable or long lasting during the earlier adolescent years are important. And I'll ask you, Mitch, to provide some comments on why even these intense, short-lived friendships are so important and valuable and a part of healthy development earlier in life.
Yeah, no one wants to see their child have their heart broken by a friendship that didn't last. It's so
Yeah.
hard to watch your child go through that, but the truth is it's a really good learning experience that
Mhm.
kids are having these things happen within their social lives. If you think about what it looks like to have a friendship when you're around 7, 8, 9, kids say,
Mhm.
I just want to play together. And for
Mhm.
scientists, we talk about that as primarily serving the function of companionship. So kids are hanging out with one another and they're engaged in activities they both enjoy. It matters who the other kid is, but it's not the same as the friendships they start developing in middle school, where we see more of the qualities of intimate disclosure, trust, support, really helping one another feel good about themselves as a
Mhm.
person. And those are skills that, well, frankly, we spend our entire lives evaluating all of our relationships on those same phenomena. We don't figure it out in middle school. We don't figure it out in high school. Many of us continue to talk about how complex and complicated relationships are on those exact dimensions
Yeah.
with most of the relationships we have. So kids really need this training ground to figure that
Mhm.
out and start having those realizations of, wow, I really enjoy hanging out with them, but I somehow feel worse about myself when I'm done hanging out with them. Be like, okay, we've learned something about relationships. We've learned something about who you are in relationships, and that's what you're going to take with you to the next relationship. So it's a really important training ground to try on different things, see what
Yeah.
fits, and figure out who are you in a different
Yeah.
kind of relationship.
Exactly. And we build, just like in everything else in development, we build on the previous history, right? And we learn from it implicitly, and we grow from it. And one thing my kids are in early adolescence right now, and what I really appreciate about their relationships is how much they laugh together. And we do that later in life too. Your friends tend to be people you laugh with and you really bond with. And that comes so easily during earlier adolescence. And so even if the friendship doesn't last, sometimes those beautiful memories of bonding and learning how to bond are equally important. Thank you. Thank you, Mitch. Um, so, Phyllis, does this sound consistent with what you see in the young people you work with? And even when friendships fail, is it still positive? That's what I hear Mitch saying. Oh, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I agree with everything Mitch said. What I would say is that a lot of the skills that they're working on in early adolescence are subtle but kind of profound. So
Mhm.
just understanding that you can be surrounded by people and be lonely, or you can have one or two friends and not be the most popular person, but actually be much happier than that popular person who's, surrounded by frenemies. As Mitch knows well from his research.
Yeah.
And also they're working on things like, how do you interpret feedback? Some of the classic scenarios I'll see is somebody who's spending the entire day just bent out of shape and out of sorts because they're sure that two friends who were talking at recess and didn't include them in that conversation were not including them because they wanted to trash talk them. And probably, I mean, I like the egotistic approach, but probably they weren't thinking about them at all. But learning all of these skills, learning how to find that line between what is funny and what is mean. I agree, they are the funniest humans on the planet, but they often cross that line. Learning things like if you're standing at the edge of a group and you are not talking and you're not even saying two words, you're not actually part of the conversation. And
Mhm.
all of those other skills, how to give a compliment, how to be a good listener, how to recognize how you feel when you're with somebody. You may not even have the thinking ability to recognize that you're really unhappy when you're with someone. That's another
Yeah.
place where adults can play a big role in
Yes.
showing that curiosity and making observations about what we're seeing. But all of those things are so important. And I think if we try to rescue kids from the downside of all of those relationships or that hurt that they're feeling, we strip them of the sense that they're the expert in their lives. And we want them to trust themselves and to learn to trust themselves so that when they're older, obviously they can walk away from a relationship that's not working for them, or from
Yeah.
a job where they have a supervisor who isn't treating them right. So all of these skills, as hard as it is to watch them go through it and suffer, and also have the highs that go with it, it's not
Mhm.
all negative. I think
Yeah.
we give middle schoolers in particular an unfair reputation for being mean. I don't see them that way at all, but it is probably the most volatile time when it comes to their friendships, and that's hard to watch.
Yeah, but I think you're exactly highlighting the importance of experiential learning that happens through these friendships. What makes me feel good when I reflect on it, and that's where adults can serve an important role. Let's reflect on this friendship and how it's making you feel. Phyllis, you mentioned frenemies. Can we talk a little bit about, from all of you, what does that mean? What are frenemies, and do they serve an important role? And we've all probably had them in different spaces, work and friendships and high school and everything, but what's
Yeah,
it?
I think that when I think about a friend of me, I think about somebody who's inconsistent. Sometimes they're your
Mm.
friend, and sometimes they're
Yeah.
not. And again, I think kids have a lot of misconceptions about what a good friend is. So you might have a friend who is a great listener, but really terrible at keeping secrets.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't a good friend for you, but it is a good opportunity to reflect on whether this is somebody you should confide in. I often have to tell young adolescents, once you've told one person, you have told everyone. And
Yeah.
that's fine if you don't mind people knowing. Sometimes you want people to know, but just think carefully. With my own son, I remember when he was in middle school, we were in a car full of, I don't know, like 9 boys. And one of them was like, I want to tell you all who my crush is.
Mhm.
But don't
And
tell
you're
anyone.
like,
It's a secret. And
oh no.
I still remember my son saying, you might want to rethink that plan. That might not go the way you want it to go. But just really thinking about how one person isn't going to serve all of your needs. I think kids
Yes.
tend to overrate the importance of a best friend. There's a lot of
Yeah.
downsides to a best friend. Kids are drawn to kids like them. It means they're not practicing social skills with a broader range of people. So
Uh-huh.
we want to be using all of these experiences that they're having as just conversation starters and talking points so that we're encouraging them to think about it as well.
Yeah. And not any one friend is going to serve everything. And
No,
as
and
we're good at that, right? We know the friend we can go to a spa weekend with, or talk about the news, or go work out. You have people feel different needs.
yes, exactly. And as adults, we know, oh, this is my jogging friend, and this
Yeah.
is the person I go
Right.
to concerts with, and this is the
Uh-huh.
person who I call. And kids may not recognize that you go to different people for different needs. If you
Yeah.
have somebody who's kind of an Eeyore or negative all the time, and you need your spirits lifted, you're probably
Yeah.
not going to benefit from going to that
That's right.
particular kid.
That's right. That's right. Stephany or Mitch, any thoughts about frenemies that we have to know about from your perspective?
I mean, I would say that one of the things, I mean, just like Phyllis is saying, one of the things that we kind of learn a little bit in middle school is how different kids are in their social relationships. And as different as it seems, there are some pretty reliable categories that we can expect. There's going to be those kids that are just so nice and are always going to give you support. There are those kids that may be a little bit more self-centered and the conversation always seems to come back to them. There's the ones that seem to cause drama and really enjoy, spreading some gossip around and getting to
Yeah.
be the person who has all the information while everyone else is freaking out. Um and helping kids to recognize that their observations, their understanding of that is valuable, right? I mean, this is part of
Mhm.
what we learned during this time.
Yeah.
And mostly how to be empathic towards each of those kids and recognize they're not horrible people. They're
Right.
learning just like everybody else. And right now they're finding this to be a helpful way of interacting with others. But maybe that will come with pros and cons for them. That doesn't mean we have to emulate that exact behavior ourselves. And how can we think in a compassionate way about why they might be engaged in the
Yeah.
behaviors they're engaging in?
Yeah.
But I think it's remarkable how brilliant kids are at observing the other kids' behavior.
Mhm.
And once they realize that as an adult, you're interested in hearing the way that they think about those kids and how they're understanding it. And you can say, yeah, that was exactly the way it was when I was growing. You're
Yeah.
really creating that fertile ground for let's talk together about how you can learn the most from these lessons.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, at least in my experience, I've found that they really appreciate getting to process that out loud with an adult.
That's right.
Yeah,
Exactly. 'Cause we've done that work of processing it and reflecting on that person in junior high who was
right.
a frenemy, but so fun and funny. And so we wanted to be around them, but they also made us feel intimidated. And so I think our young people want to hear it from us.
Yep.
Yeah. Stephany, any tidbits about frenemies? You don't have to disclose who yours are, but if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I wonder how that dynamic or the development of okay, this is how I understand this perspective
Mhm.
is developed when the frenemy is like the best friend, for instance,
Mhm.
right? But I've always realized that as I've grown, I've strayed away from the word best friend because I've started to realize that you can't have one person that does everything with you,
Yeah.
right? So I've learned to start compartmentalizing my friendships. And so straying away from the word best friend, I recognized that around my like first or second year of college, where I was like,
Mhm.
you know what? I don't want a best friend. I want a friend that I can do this with, and then I can do this.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was really, I really appreciated your perspectives, Mitch and Phyllis, for both putting words to a lot of what I have felt.
So the way we communicate and interact with peers has changed so much over the years. I mean, certainly, I think Mitch, Phyllis, and I are in the same generation where we didn't grow up with digital technology and social media. And clearly, that is just another space for young people to establish and grow their relationships. And Mitch, I know you run a large center that is focused on how digital technology interacts with development and may impact young people. It's a complex topic, but what trends are you seeing in the research as to how digital technology is affecting friendships and peer relationships?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that it's not all good and it's not all bad. And we
Mhm.
really have to be thinking about how to be a wise consumer of the tech tools that we have today. If tech is allowing you to meet people you wouldn't otherwise meet, allow you to get support and access to information you otherwise couldn't get, maybe because you're the only person of your identity in your own home or in your community, these are really good ways to use tech that can really expand our social lives and provide us things that we just couldn't get back in the old analog days. Um,
Mhm.
you can also use tech like the direct messaging feature to develop the kind of emotional intimacy that's so important for friendships throughout our entire history as a species.
Mhm.
We really rely on that ability to connect with others and feel like, as Stephany was saying, I see an alignment between things I care about and I value with someone else, and I don't feel alone in having those feelings and experiences.
Mhm.
if if we're using tech though solely to increase the numerical counts of our followers or our reposts or things like that, that we don't know yet what developmental function that might serve. At least for
Mhm.
now, it doesn't seem to map on to a developmental function that has previously been necessary or valued for adolescent development. So, unless you're going to grow up to be a PR agent, developing that kind of, numerical counts and all that attention on your own profile and on yourself, um, that doesn't seem to connect to the ways that humans interact and humans get rewards from interacting with each other. So it's about moderation, it's about mindfulness and why
Mhm.
we get online, what we
Mhm.
choose to do online, and when we know we've met our goals online. Now, unfortunately, we just have to keep in mind that when kids or parents are kind of helping to think about those factors, there may be others who have very different motives for why they would like kids to be online, maybe for as long as possible. So we're a little bit not all rowing in the same direction here, and that might complicate matters when we think about how to help kids with social media or tech, because there might be others that are giving them different messages.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think what you're saying is so spot on because social media is new for all of us. So we're all trying to figure out the healthy engagement with it. And so there may not be the same level of scaffolding there is as with these other topics we've talked about in helping and supporting young people as they navigate the friendships.
That's exactly right. I mean, too many times parents, and I have teenagers as well, it's so
Mhm.
easy to say, well, I didn't grow up with any of this. I don't know why you need to be on there all this
Right.
time, right?
Right.
And kind of dismiss it in a way,
Yeah.
which is a
Yeah.
totally natural reaction to have. But
Yeah.
accidentally, what you're kind of saying then is, well, whatever's going on, don't come and talk to me about it because I
That's
don't
right.
get it, I don't value it, I don't understand it, and I'm not gonna take it seriously. We probably want to do the exact opposite and say, what does it mean to have a streak for that many days? Why is that important? And what does it mean when someone puts a flame emoji next to that piece? What does that really
Yeah.
mean that they
Yeah.
think and feel? And let kids be the teachers to us
Yes.
to open the
Exactly.
door for us having genuine reactions and scaffolding moments. But it's a little bit funny because we do need them to teach us what a little bit, and then
Yes.
that allows us to come in with our
Yeah.
lessons and our experience that might have
Yeah.
been not digital, but still very valuable in helping them learn what they're going through.
Yeah. I appreciate, Mitch, what you're saying, what I'm hearing you're saying is that it is really, if we are dismissive of digital technology because we don't understand it, it's sending a message that we're going to be dismissive of anything that we don't understand. And why would any young person or any person want to come to us and have a discussion about it when we've kind of closed that door as unimportant, even if it's not specifically about the digital media. And yes, I think we learn a lot about technology from our kids. At least I do myself. Um, Stephany, as a young person who's had digital technology probably throughout your adolescence, what do you feel it's played? How has it played a role in your friendships?
Okay, I think this is a really great question to ask. As for me, I had two varied experiences towards the very beginning of my adolescence. I'll disclose.
Mhm.
In fifth grade, the iPhone 4 came out. So
Okay.
I know it was super popular for everyone. Everyone wanted the iPhone 4S. Everyone wanted the iPhone 4S. And
Yeah.
so when I expressed that to my parents did come from the generation where we didn't have technology. You
Mhm.
don't need it. We don't find merit in it. And
Mhm.
so it was almost at the beginning of my adolescence, it was used almost as an exclusionary tools because a lot of students who had that were able to connect with other students that did
Mhm.
have that. So it became kind of like a social distance between the peers that did have it and the peers that didn't. But
Mhm.
as we all grew up and we all started having technology, there was almost like a learning gap between me and the students who already had access.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
like there were a lot of social cues that I completely missed
Mhm.
because I didn't have access to it very when my peers were. So I think it's very interesting that those were kind of my experiences with it and having to play like catch up with everyone else in my age group when it comes to social media and when it comes to learning how to connect or reconnect with my group.
Yeah, I think and digital media is just one more way of connecting, right? And so if we feel excluded from that, whether it's digital media or sports or whatever else it is, then the young people may feel excluded from their friendships. And this is another way that friendships can serve as a bridge for the things that we don't know. So, Phyllis, on that point, what do you find that young people get most out of their friendships in the middle school years when they're transitioning and going to different high schools and things like that?
That's a good question. I have to think about that for a second. I think that the skill building part is huge, that and that self-awareness that they're developing. You learn so much about yourself from the way you interact with other people, from the kind of treatment you'll accept from other people, from learning to resolve conflicts, setting boundaries, how do you get some space without, blowing up the bridge. One of the skills that I often have to work on with kids are very straightforward, simple things. And for any parents who are listening and working on these skills with their kids, I would say, even for older teens, even for high school age kids, they do want the support with these really practical tips, things like, maybe you just wait a little longer before you text them back.
Mhm.
Another skill that I've found that is really hard for kids, and maybe it gets a little better in high school, but especially in middle school, so many kids don't want to be the host. They don't want to bear the burden
Mhm.
of making someone else have a good time, making sure someone else has a good time. And then there are these antiquated rules that we as adults bring into the picture. Well, if they haven't invited you back, then you shouldn't invite them over again, when actually
Mhm.
that's not true. There's very few kids inviting anyone over, but everybody wants to be invited over. So if
Mhm.
you're okay being the host,
Interesting.
even if you then are inviting the same kids over multiple times,
Yeah.
don't overthink that. You
Yeah.
you can be the person who hosts those other kids, but if we don't do that, then what happens is so many kids have this false perception that everyone else is out there having tons of social plans and they're the only ones who are on their own, when in reality, all of them are really struggling to figure out how to connect, and having such highly structured lives and the ability to communicate
Yeah.
online doesn't help. And for the online piece, I will say, really knowing why your kid is on there as well. So if you have a kid who you know has weaker social skills, and I really appreciate that parents do typically know if it's their kid who's
Yeah.
maybe just too much for their friends, or they have that Eeyore syndrome I talked about earlier, where they're relentlessly negative and it kind of pushes people away, or maybe they're a little bit anxious about getting together socially, so they turn to gaming or they turn to interacting with friends online. And if you know that their skills are weaker, and if you know that it's a way to avoid those interactions, we really want to be figuring out how we can help them connect in person with their friends, even if they're having really, really short, highly structured hangouts with people, but not letting them escape 100% online.
Yeah. And so is that a role that parents should play? Should they be brokering those kind of hangouts, or do you think that it's easier when they're younger, but then as they become
Yeah.
middle
You know,
school?
it's tricky when
Yeah.
once you're in the middle of, it's different with a fourth grader, obviously, than a seventh grader. A parent
Yeah.
can't make their kids' plans in seventh grade,
Yeah.
but you can organize a potluck with another family, or if your
Yeah.
kid's on the sport team, you can take them out for ice cream or for lunch after
Yeah.
and give them that kind of an assist. You can suggest certain people that might be a good match. You can talk to the school. Sometimes the school can orchestrate some matches with kids who also are looking for other friends.
Yeah.
But I want to really emphasize this. It's not just the kids who struggle socially who are struggling socially. So it's
Yeah.
not only the kids who have weak social skills who
Yeah.
need support. I've had really socially adept eighth grade girls who I would never in a million years think need any kind of concrete help, who very much want someone to tell them, well, how do you enter a conversation? How do you invite someone over? How do you
Exactly.
tell someone that you don't want to have a sleepover with them every single week, that you
Right.
also see other people?
Set
These are
boundaries.
really
Yeah.
hard skills to learn in these years, and that's part of what makes these friendships so important. And the other piece of this that I think is important for kids to understand is that you really are who you're with, and it's even more true, the research shows, for boys. So we think about peer pressure as, coercive, but it's really behavior contagion. So boys are more likely than girls to behave for better or for worse in the same way as the people they're with. So
Yeah.
really, and I know Stephany mentioned that one of the lessons she learned was, how do you surround yourself with the people who reflect your values and the way you
Yeah.
want to show up in the world? And I think those are conversations parents can also be having with their kids about how they want to be perceived by adults, by other kids, and whether or not the people they're hanging out with are serving that goal.
Yeah. And have those conversations, also model those conversations, right? I think all of us in our own friendships as adults, do we invite people over? Are we reaching out? Are we receptive when we're invited to coffee after work? Are we doing those other light touch social interactions that we would hope our kids are doing to gain new friends or get new insights into other people?
And also just really understanding how big of a risk it is for
Yeah.
kids in this
Yeah.
age group. So many times, and I'm sure I've done this to my own kids too, we'll say something like, why don't you just text them and see if they want to come over or want to hang out? And for them, they're like, well,
Like, are
I
you
first need to
insane?
figure out how to make eye contact with
Right.
this person.
Right, exactly.
Break it
And
down
just
a little bit.
figuring out, when my son is now 14, but when he was, I think, about 8, he said to me, how do you, what if, I'm not kind of interested in the conversation? How do I get out of a conversation? I thought that was so insightful that he was trying to think about it from a top-down perspective, but how do you teach someone that kind of thing? Where he's like, I don't want to hurt their feelings, but I'm bored, that kind of thing. So there are some really unspoken social rules that we've all kind of learned over time that we don't know how to explain. I have a last question about that I'll share in a second, but before that, I would love to know from each of you what your friendships were like, are like. What have you learned from your own friendships?
You want me to start?
Sure.
It's funny. We bring so much of our own experiences to this work. And when I first started writing Middle School Matters, I couldn't even remember my middle school friendships. It took a while for them to come back. But in Lynn Annapole, if you're listening, it was a really important friendship. That was my best friend. But when we went to middle school, things went a little sideways for a while. And I think one of the things I learned from that experience, without fully understanding why, is just the critical importance of making sure that you don't put all your eggs in one basket, that you are learning these social skills, because especially if I was a really shy kid and I like to surround myself with very outgoing people who would do the work
Yeah.
for me.
Me
And
too.
so one of the other lessons I learned from having to reinvent myself socially a little bit that year is how important it is that you are developing the skills that you admire in other people as well, that you are not depending on your friends to, ease the way into every social situation. There's no way out of it. You have to figure it out. One way or another, you're going to
Yeah.
be engaging with people, and middle school is a great time to think about what skills you do want to work on, or what might be getting in your way, or what friends you might be using as a crutch to
Yeah.
avoid having to deal with
Yeah.
certain anxiety-producing situations.
Exactly. You have to be involved too. You can't just passively let other people take care of your social interactions. Yeah. Mitch?
The things I'm remembering most are because I'm vicariously experiencing it all over again with my kids. And one of the things that really strikes me is, um, friendship is a funny thing because it's not like other relationships where you might even legally commit to being in a certain kind of relationship with that person or not. Friendships are much more amorphous, except for the lunch table. The lunch table really defines in a very yes no way either I am friends with you because I sit around the lunch table with you, or I am not. And the lunch table seems to trap kids into a situation that they may or may not always want to be in. Like, I don't know that I want to hang out with those kids anymore, but to not sit with them at lunch is such a giant statement.
It
It's such a
is.
huge shift. It's so hard to think about what it would be like to go sit at some other table, or God forbid to be alone at, no table. And I think it's interesting how important it is to remember some of the lessons that Stephany and Phyllis have been talking about already about, having different people in your life for different purposes, and how no one friendship serves all of your needs perfectly. But so the more that kids could be encouraged to really try on different relationships, to not sit at that lunch table, or to have an opportunity to scramble up a little bit, or to meet friends, or parents can really help to create opportunities to meet kids that are not at the lunch table, to try and just start to create an opportunity to interact with new people and try on different friendships. Otherwise, there are too many kids, it feels like, that are kind of stuck with whatever relationships they have because they're so scared of what would it be like if I really took the risk of not sitting with those people like I do every single day. So I
Yeah.
think that's where we as parents can play a big role of saying, I'm gonna slightly push you,
Yeah.
to interact with some new people, because and until you're comfortable enough where I'm helping you broaden your circle for you. Otherwise, we get very stuck in our little routines and habits in middle school.
Yeah, because it's safe and it
It's
feels
safe.
comfortable. Yeah. Yeah. And we do that too. I mean, all of us go to conferences and we gravitate towards the people that we've seen at other conferences and we want to chat with them, but
Yeah.
it can be a little intimidating to approach someone who's not in your circle already.
Hmm.
Stephany?
And then I would love to talk a little bit more about the lunch table. I think a lot of times, as a kid, it's a huge jump. It's a huge leap to say it's a huge social risk to want to sit somewhere else. And it takes a lot of pre-planning and thinking about it. And sometimes when you are in those lunch table friendships, you don't look at what else is outside of that.
Yeah.
So it's very important to learn. One of the lessons that I've had to learn was to be my own friend.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah.
like developing a friendship within my own self first
Yeah.
before I look for those qualities in someone else.
And
So,
Stephany, you bring up a good point. And I think as we graduate from high school and maybe are a little bit more independent, traveling by yourself, I think is a really good way to establish that I'm my own friend, because when you're traveling alone, you really are. And it does give a big sense of confidence that that you may not otherwise get if you're kind of in a kind of comfortable space in your own environment, but not fully alone.
Yeah, I completely agree.
We have a few questions from the audience that I'd like to share, and if you have thoughts, please jump in. One question is, what does the research say about how friend challenges in middle school, for example, carry over to adolescence and beyond? When middle schoolers don't learn the skills that foster healthy friendships, what does that mean for their future friendships?
Well, one thing that I can share, and it goes to the lunch table too. I mean, everything comes back to the lunch table, right?
Yeah.
We know that the kids who are the most sort of successful in high school and beyond, or in terms of just their ability to navigate and maneuver through different environments, are the floaters. And the
Uh-huh.
floaters are successful because they can talk to anyone.
Mhm.
And we are all, as human beings, but particularly as adolescents, drawn to people like us. So it takes a lot of self-awareness and effort to get outside of our comfort zone. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with these kids for wanting to be with people like them. It's just that's the default. And so to get out of your comfort zone requires skills. It requires encouragement from adults, modeling from adults. But we want to be letting them know that there is a payoff, that if you are able to do this, if you are able to acquire the ability to just talk to anybody about anything, your later adolescent relationships are going to be healthier. You're going to have an easier time interviewing for jobs, assert yourself with a teacher when you need help. I think there are all kinds of implications beyond your later adolescent friendships.
Yeah.
These are the same skills that they need to pretty much enter
Do
any
anything.
kind of
Yeah.
situation that they're ever going to be in.
Yeah, I like to think of those people who are good at small talk. Like some of us like, oh, I don't like small talk. But people who are good at small talk are good at everything. I mean, they can get in any space because they can float around. And how do we foster that floater kind of identity? Do you need to have a certain level of confidence? I think so, but
some of it is just where are you, what does your day look like? How is your time scheduled? And is every day you're with the same travel lacrosse team, or are you also in environments where you're likely to meet people from outside your community or outside your socioeconomic bracket, or maybe you're interacting with people who are not athletes at all?
Yeah.
But just putting kids in environments where they're forced to interact with other kids.
To be floaters.
And, yes, exactly.
Mitch, thoughts
And
about?
unfortunately, the tech world has made that much less likely to happen, right? So it kind of provides that little solitary bubble of I'm cueing that I don't want anyone to come up to me. I'm feeling safe that I don't have to go up to anybody else. I'm staring at my phone in my own social world that involves none of the actual humans in my proximity. And and that's unfortunately taking away that skill. And we're hearing about a number of kids who are experiencing more social anxiety or just some hesitation with that kind of spontaneous speech and interaction. So we do need to build in more practice because it's not happening naturally anymore, I'm afraid. One of the other things we see with the research is that we can absolutely change our relationship experiences from middle school to high school and beyond. But what's remarkable in the literature is that there are many folks who accidentally repeat a pattern that starts developing in middle school. And we want to be aware of this because we don't want our kids or we don't want ourselves to kind of repeat this pattern without realizing it. It's the idea that once you see the world in a certain way, like anyone, it's possible that someone's going to be hostile or aggressive towards me. And when they bump into me in a crowded space, rather than thinking, oh, it's crowded, they probably didn't even see me, we might immediately jump to, they were being mean, on purpose. And that kind of a way of seeing the world, interestingly, if it goes unchecked, that tends to repeat itself in every relationship along the way, including in our, long-term personal and professional relationships. But it can go the other way too. It could also be like, everyone loves me and everyone's constantly giving me praise. And then we also in those situations, we miss out on where we could be getting some really important feedback that says,
Yeah.
actually, this is not going so well. You need to change course. Um, so the research does say that like we should pay attention to little habits or assumptions that we're starting to develop in middle school
Yeah.
and make sure that we're testing those or experimenting to show not all relationship, even though it happened in fifth grade every day, that doesn't mean it's that way with every relationship forever. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, the research shows people actually tend to look in a crowded space and they only focus on those
Yeah.
things that fit their prior assumptions
Yeah.
of how
They
they
get
think
stuck in
relationships
that.
go.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how do we help people or early adolescents get away from that? Because that's their reality, right? There's always someone out to get you. Someone's always kind of judging what they're wearing or what they're saying. So without being dismissive as this is not permanent, right? This is just one thing that happened. How do we
I,
do that?
I, I can give an example of
Yeah,
that
please do.
because that's pretty much my everyday work as a school counselor.
Oh,
It is
perfect.
trying to help kids think a little bit more flexibly.
Yeah.
And they often will go right to that worst case scenario. And some of
Mhm.
it, again, is that it's like me.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
they assume for everyone else, it's also you.
Yeah.
But one of the things I'll say to a kid who comes in, the teacher hates me. They left me out on purpose because they think I'm a loser, which means I'm never going to have friends and my whole life is going to be. They just go down this, negativity spiral. One of the things I will say to them is you don't have to believe this alternative explanation I'm going to ask you to come up with. And that's key because then they freeze. They can't do it at all. But if
Yeah.
you be really creative and you are coming up with one other possibility other than they pushed you on purpose or they were looking at you funny because they thought that you were dumb when you got the answer wrong in class, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
then they often will be able to come up with something that's a little bit more realistic. And even if they don't, they start to learn how to think a
Yeah.
little more expansively rather than
Uh-huh.
going right to that worst case scenario.
Uh-huh.
Similarly, the lunchroom, the lunch table is like such a classic example. I'll have students who don't want to go into the lunchroom,
Yeah.
particularly if I'm seeing kids in private practice who have to walk into a really big public school lunchroom. They may not have the same lunch period as their friends. It's a very overwhelming experience. And I've had kids who will eat lunch in the bathroom stall, which is gross, but
Oh
also
my gosh. Yeah.
hate that. And so helping them deal with the discomfort so that they can see they can manage that worst case scenario. I mean, sometimes they are talking negatively about you. Sometimes they did look at you funny because they thought you said something dumb, and we want them to be able to manage that too. But giving them some strategies. Well, what if you took up something in to read? Not a phone, because fortunately most schools are saying no phones now, which is
Yeah.
great. But what if you took something in to read while everybody is settling down? So in that awkward time, you have something to do. So really giving kids the sense that yes, you're going to feel uncomfortable. Yes, sometimes you're going to worry that people are thinking terrible things about you, but you have the power to pull your thoughts back to the middle, and you have the power to deal with the discomfort that it creates. Let's just brainstorm and think about something that you might be able to do when you find yourself inevitably in those kinds of situations.
Yeah. And that the spotlight isn't always on you. I think my dad very harshly told me no one cares what you're doing. I care what you're doing. No one else cares at all. And I thought it was such a harsh thing to hear, but it was so true that I was over amplifying what I assumed people were focused on, and it was not me. And that was a really important thing to hear. We have a question. Again, the lunch table is such an important space. Another question about it. I appreciate the discussion around the lunch table at this age. I wonder what your thoughts are for youth who are on ADHD meds who may feel out of the loop because they have suppressed appetite, so they don't fit with the lunch bunch, so to speak, or any child who doesn't want to be a part of that group.
Yeah, I think it's fine for, for kids to have different ways that they connect with others and form friendships. And some don't like to sit around and talk. They want to eat lunch as fast as humanly possible, or say
Yeah.
that they ate lunch, but just throw it
Yeah.
away and then run out and play.
Yeah.
And that happens, and that's okay too. Everyone's going to be different. Hopefully kids are able to find someone that's similar to them and what they want to do enough to develop that friendship. On the flip side, we do want to start to teach kids the idea that the world is not a place where we all get to do whatever we want to do whenever we want to do it. And sometimes we do have to make those compromises. And
Yeah.
if your friends are really enjoying sitting around the table and talking for a while and you're not, what's a way to tolerate that for a little bit longer each day, in
Yeah.
order to do that? Of course, with limits. We don't want
Yeah.
kids to be conformists, but
Yeah.
we do want to teach them patience. We want to teach them the
Yeah.
value of boredom.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and help them to have a little bit of tolerance, even if it's something they don't want or don't feel that they can do.
Yeah. An important life skill. We do that every day in our jobs, right?
Yep.
With in many different ways. Thank you.
I'll just add,
Yeah,
because
please do.
ADHD comes up so often as
Uh-huh.
a concern, because
Uh-huh.
it does impact kids socially in addition to the other ways that it impacts them. And there's that, that saying that all kids need is one or two friends.
Yeah.
And when it comes to kids who are just struggling to connect or struggling to attend long enough to have that, prolonged face-to-face conversation or sit around the lunch table, those kids tend to be paired, and we do this in the school setting too a lot, with really patient, kind kids who we think who would tolerate them. And then what ends up happening is we drive those kids away and they don't want to hang out with them at all. And what we really want is to be giving kids opportunities to acquire the skills they need to be connected to those good choice friends down the road. And so what I would be really focusing on is not necessarily whether they're at the lunch table or they're sitting for a long time with friends having a prolonged conversation, but that you're giving them opportunities to socialize with a lot of kids for short periods of time so that they're practicing those skills without turning anyone off.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. All right, we have just a few minutes left, so thank you. But I want to ask about, and we've touched a little bit about this, but how do we as adults support young people in forming and learning about these relationships? And Stephany, I want to start with you because you are, I think, what we would scientifically call a late adolescent, but you're also an early adult. And so is there space for support from mentors or parents or other people who are older than you in supporting friendships?
Absolutely. I think my relationships with others was impacted by the mentors and the behaviors that I saw modeled by my parents. Like for instance, my dad is a huge floater, so he can talk to anyone at any time in any language. So due to that and having to like always be around him,
Yeah.
at a very young age, I hated it because it would put a lot of pressure on me of like, oh no, now he's gonna talk to someone else.
Yeah.
So but as I've grown, I've watching him and how he initiated those conversations has allowed me to kind of model that in my own relationships and learn how to talk to others. So I think definitely watching and the behaviors that are modeled to children or young adolescents are going to impact them and show them how they can do that as themselves. So
Exactly. That modeling is so important at all stages of our lives, and we really learn from mentors formally and informally, explicitly or implicitly. Thank you. And sometimes those mentors and role models are our parents, which is great. As parents, we want to hear that, but sometimes we don't recognize it as such. Phyllis or Mitch?
I think we as adults, we just want to make sure we're invited to help
Yeah.
kids, that we're not inserting ourselves in ways that are inappropriate. I think one well-meaning mistake we tend to make, and I hear this from the kid point of view, even from fourth graders, fifth graders, if somebody's parent is too involved in whatever arguments the friends are having and jumping in or calling the other parent, texting the other parent, sometimes it becomes a burden to be friends with that kid.
Right.
The parent is too
Yeah.
over involved. So pausing and making sure that A, you're invited, B, that it's not going to hurt your child socially, and then C, that it's an appropriate opportunity to get involved. So I think about the difference between, say, bullying and meanness. If you've got true classic bullying, it's something that's going on for a long time. There's an intent to hurt someone. There's a power difference, and they're probably going to need adult support. But most of the time, what you're hearing is just plain old meanness. Somebody says something unkind to somebody, and they can solve that on their own. They might or might not want your advice, and you can coach them if they do and if it's invited. But they really should be learned. This is, again, it's uncomfortable for us to watch, but we do want them to be practicing these skills.
Exactly. And also practicing understanding that we have confidence in them, right? This is just another way to show that we believe in their ability to handle situations, whether it's a friendship or an academic issue or whatever it is, that they have the skills to do so on themselves. And we are there to support, but don't assume that we need to be the ones leading that intervention. Yeah. Thank you. Mitch?
I would just, add that I think it's really important for parents to know that kids are biologically built to think that their parents are super lame once they become around 10 or 11 and really be very interested in bonding with friends. So when that happens, I think we don't want to accidentally discount friendships as being silly and not important. We don't want to take kids, what seems to them as life or death, kind of things that are happening. We don't want to say, oh, none of this matters. Wait till you're my age and you have to pay the bills. No,
Right.
to them, they are biologically really, really very invested in these friendships. And friendships are not just for fun. They are a very important learning ground,
Yeah.
training ground for many skills that kids will have for the rest of their lives. And we are ceding just a little bit of our parental responsibility to each and every one of those friends who's going to help shape who that child becomes. So I take the opposite approach. I kind of really very seriously invest in my kids' social relationships from afar, right? I'm not getting involved in them, but really and ask them, how is that going? Just
Yeah.
as much as asking them about how school went and how they did on a test.
Yes. Yes.
How did you do making
Yes.
others feel included today?
Yes.
How did you do with that awkward situation you had 3 days ago with
Yes.
someone that was a friend? And really let them know that relationships matter. Because at the end of the day, those are the things that life is made of.
That's
And we
right.
want them to know that this is important. We validate that and we're here for them through
Yeah.
every step of it. It's such a turbulent time for many kids with their relationships. So let's not minimize it or let's instead really sympathize and lean into how important it is for our kids to feel supported during this process.
I couldn't agree with you more that that belittling their friendships or dismissing them as unimportant is a disservice because they're so important to them. And in the same way that we can just, sometimes dismiss puppy love. Puppy love is real love, right? The love that you feel, I know we're not talking about that kind of love today, but 14, 15, 16 is so real and long lasting that by dismissing it, we're missing an opportunity to really feel what they feel and help them and support them through those intense feelings. I cannot believe it. We are at time. I greatly appreciate you, Phyllis, Mitch, and Stephany, for being here today and sharing your insights and both from your lived experience and your professional experience. I hope it was valuable. We've gotten some notes in the chat and the Q&A about how folks are living this. And so this is a really timely conversation. So I really appreciate it. I wish everyone a happy Valentine's Day and Galentine's Day, whatever you celebrate. And have a good weekend. Thank you. And I want to remind everyone that this is a recording of this video will be on the UCLA website and on YouTube in the coming weeks. So thank you. Bye.